In this next section of Chapter 13, we want to look at molecular structures. Now that we have dot structures understood and that we're starting to get comfortable with drawing dot structures, the one issue we have with dot structures is the fact that we're drawing them on a two-dimensional surface. Whenever we draw a dot structure, we're drawing it on a piece of paper or we're drawing it on the computer screen, and we're only seeing 2 dimensions, when in reality, molecules exist in 3 dimensions. So we need to be able to determine the shape of this molecule in 3 dimensions from the 2-dimensional drawing. To do this, we use something called VSEPR theory. VSEPR, acronym that stands for valence shell electron pair repulsion. So to describe that, valence shell, so the electrons in the valence level of the atom are repelled from one another because electrons are negative. So you're going to minimize the repulsions by putting the electrons as far apart as they can possibly be. And this ends up determining the 3-dimensional structure. There's a table for this in your textbook, page 389. To figure out the shape, you first have to draw the Lewis structure, which is why we talked about Lewis structures first. Count the number of bonded pairs and the number of lone pairs. So how many atoms are bonded to the central atom, and how many lone pairs does the central atom have? This only applies to the central atom, the atom in the center of the molecule. Then, based on that, how many bonds we have and how many lone pairs we have around the central atom, we can determine the shape. So let's go through the 5 shapes that we need to know. The first shape is linear, or a straight line. This has 2 atoms bonded to the central atom, no lone pairs on the central atom, creating a bond angle of 180 degrees. The bond angle is taken by going the angle between adjacent atoms. So here we have a full 180 degrees. Example of this would be CO2. So if we take the dot structure of CO2, you'll see there are 2 things bonded to carbon, 2 oxygens, no lone pairs on carbon, meaning this is a linear molecule. The next shape has 3 things bonded to the central atom. This is trigonal planar, all in the same plane. 3 things are bonded to the central atom. Once again, no lone pairs. We get a bond angle of 120 degrees. These are all on the same plane. There's 120 degrees between atoms. Break up a circle into 3 parts and you get 120 degrees. Example of this, CH2O. So if I were to draw the dot structure for CH2O, it would look like this. 3 things bonded to carbon, no lone pairs on carbon, and we get that trigonal planar. It's all on the same plane. You could lay it flat in your hand. Next shape, tetrahedral. Tetrahedral has 4 things bonded to the central atom. Once again, no lone pairs. This gives a bond angle of about 110 degrees when you space them out as far as possible. It kind of makes this pyramid shape. An example of this would be CH4. So you have 4 things bonded to the central atom, no lone pairs. So 4 hydrogens. Now you see, carbon here looks flat in this drawing, but in reality it's more like this, with each of these being our hydrogens, this center being our carbon. So it forms out like a pyramid. The next shape is Trigonal Pyramidal. This is also 3 things bonded to the central atom, but now we have 1 lone pair on the central atom. Get a bond angle of 107. An example of this would be NH3. If you draw NH3 out, it looks like this in 2 dimensions, but in reality, from the picture above, these 3 hydrogens get pushed down below the nitrogen, and we get this pyramid shape, and that's why it's referred to as trigonal pyramidal. Trigonal, 3 things, pyramidal, pyramid shape. And finally, angular. Angular has 2 things bonded to the central atom, 2 lone pairs, and an example of this would be water. If you draw water, just the Lewis dot structure, you could draw it like this, but in reality, that ends up forming a molecule that is flat, sits in a plane, but has this angular shape to it in 3 dimensions. These are the 5 shapes we need to know for this course. So let's review. We have our 5 shapes, and the key thing that's going to differentiate each of these shapes is the number of atoms that are bonded to the central atom and the number of lone pairs that are on the central atom. So for example, with a linear molecule. In a linear molecule, we have 2 atoms bonded to the central atom and no lone pairs. The difference for this is that an angular, bent, or V-shaped molecule, you see all 3 names, has 2 things bonded to the central atom, but 2 lone pairs. Trigonal planar and trigonal pyramidal each have 3 things bonded to the central atom. Planar has no lone pairs on the central atom. Pyramidal has 1. The tetrahedral, 4 things bonded to the central atom. Once again, no lone pairs. There are other shapes that exist that have expanded octets where you have more than 8 electrons around the central atom, but for this course we will just be focusing on these 5 shapes. So let's look at some examples. NF3. Once again, we want to draw the dot structure. Here we have nitrogen, 3 things bonded to it, 1 lone pair. So this is going to be trigonal pyramidal. O2, we draw the dot structure for O2. It ends up looking like this. Here we have only 2 atoms. This must be linear. HCN, if you remember from when we did dot structures, looks like this. 2 things bonded to the central atom, no lone pairs. It is linear. BF3, now this is an exception to our typical drawing. We would draw 3 bonds. There's only 3 electrons on boron, so the structure that it forms is this. This is an exception to the octet rule, but this is the structure that we get. This would be trigonal planar. 3 things bonded to the central atom, no lone pairs. Let's do a couple more examples. H2S. We do H2S. Sulfur has 6 electrons, each hydrogen has 1. This would be angular. SO4 2-. Sulfur would end up with 4 oxygens around it, each with 6 lone electrons around the oxygen. So we have 4 things bonded to the central atom, no lone pairs on the central atom, so this will be tetrahedral. NH4+. Draw this one over here. Four hydrogens around the central atom. Once again, this will also be tetrahedral. Finally, SiO2. Silicon has 6. Each oxygen has 6. Silicon has 4. Each oxygen has 6. So you end up with this shape. And this would be linear. So draw the dot structure. Look at the central atom. Determine the number of things bonded to the central atom. Determine the number of lone pairs. And based on that, you can determine the shape.